So I spent a week with the Pixel 11 as my main device, and while it is a modest update, I have some thoughts having used this for a more extensive period, so let's get into it in this video. If you want our full rundown of the Pixel 11 when we get into it over the coming months, and even more phones or Android itself, then stick around. Hit subscribe, I'd love to have you as part of the team. Cheers. I mean, on the face of it, I think it's really tough to talk about the design when well, it is almost 99.9% the same as last year. I'm exaggerating a little bit there, but the outright biggest changes is that full glass camera bar section on the Pixel 11. Firstly, I didn't even notice it during my initial hands-on, and then I had to go back and look at it. However, I do think this is a great change. It looks very consistent, and it arguably makes the camera bar, which is, dare I say, a little bit iconic, stand out for the better. Not many people will make the switch over from the Pixel 10, but I do think the weight reduction of around 7 grams is genuinely noticeable. I figured I wouldn't care, but it's been a good change. Maybe the lack of metal around that camera bar and some of the shavings on this to make it a little bit thinner means it's a lighter device for that particular purpose, but I do think there is another bonus here as the phone sits a little bit flatter when upright on a desk. Another great change. Maybe eventually we'll get a completely flat camera bar like the Pixel A series, but yeah, am I clutching at straws to find a difference between the Pixel 11 and the Pixel 10? Yeah, you bet it. The Pixel 11 and Pixel 10 feel almost identical. Chunky, stable, very comfortable to hold. I've paired it with the brand new Pixel Clear case. That is also similarly fine. I do dislike the exposed lip on the bottom edge. I don't think this case is worth anywhere near $50, but otherwise it's an acceptable starter case. You can get better cases for that kind of price, and that just is what it is at this point in time. There are some tangible gains though that I think you can't see right away. Last year I was critical of the strength of the Pixel Snap magnets. The good news is that Google, I guess they've listened, and the magnets are marginally stronger this year versus last year. When you attach a kickstand or similar, the snap is stronger, the connection feels more stable, and it is harder to wobble things off with a vigorous shake. I would like it to be a little bit stronger, but it is something you spot right away if you've tried Pixel Snap from any of the Pixel 10 series. I'm not disappointed by the lack of design changes. It's a design that works, and I don't think you should throw out the baby with the bathwater, as it were. Even so, there's nothing here to be truly wowed by. Google took the blueprint and just iterated a little more, and it kind of is what it is. I think that's, I'm not giving them a pass. It tends to be the case here with the smartphone industry, a wider kind of look at it. The design works, and at least there are no LED gimmicks here if you do or don't care about those on the base model. So as for the performance, as I say, this has been my main phone for a week. At least it does feel a little bit better in my experience than the previous generation, particularly the base model. I don't doubt that Google has tailored the experience to make it feel fast and smooth out of the box like they probably do with every device. If you've come from a phone with the slower UFS 3.1 storage, a Pixel phone in particular, I hope that you can feel this as well when you try this phone for the first time. Apps do load marginally faster from a cold start. We're talking milliseconds though. There is a bit of an astute smoothness I think is hard to quantify in a Pixel. We all tend to talk about it. You know it when you see it or you feel it. And this does feel a little bit dialed up this year as well with that faster storage on the base model. And I don't know why Google continues to tune the display to 60 Hz out of the box by default. It should be set at that full flow 120 Hz, because I do think there's only one chance to make a first impression, and 60 Hz just isn't it, especially with Material 3 Expressive and the rest of Android being so smooth and tailored for 120 Hz or 90 Hz and above displays. Coming over from the Pixel 10 Pro XL, I switched to this phone without a hitch. Android 17 just feels like a warm pair of slippers at this point, even though it's not necessarily that old. There isn't much here that feels particularly standout from a core OS experience, and that is both a positive and a negative, especially when you pick up a new phone and you kind of want new stuff to be there right at your fingertips. Even the new Tensor G6 chip, it feels identical to me day to day. Maybe there are some minor bumps that I haven't necessarily noticed, but for the kind of things I've been doing in the week that I've been using this phone, I couldn't tell you how things have improved. I'm just glad that this is the only device in the lineup that actually has no RAM cuts. Basically, there's no it's parity with last year. I think it would have been really painful to see the Pixel 11 get clipped to 8GB of RAM, which was a rumor ahead of launch, so it's nice to see that we get 12GB of RAM. It should be pretty smooth for the foreseeable future. Just speaking about software features for a moment, as I say, there is nothing really much to write home about, or at least nothing that I think will change your phone day to day. I have used Rambler a little bit, and it does work really well. But I can't get it to show text in real time when I'm talking, as I saw in a pre-release demo. You talk into the microphone, or the microphone icon, when you have Gboard available to you, and the text appears all at once. I'll be honest, That isn't ideal, but it handles stutters, changes of text, and course corrections absolutely perfectly. I'd hesitate to call it a killer edition, but it is one of those nice to haves. Another minor point of contention I have to note, though, is that I'm not sure if this was merely a blip with the new modem or if it was my phone itself that had it did have some severe connection problems while connected to a VPN and a 5G network on the 3 carrier here in the UK. I actually had to flip the phone in and out of airplane mode to get pages to load and apps to refresh while connected to Proton VPN and the Google Pixel VPN. However, that was only in a couple of locations in my town or my city, as it were. The connection has otherwise been really solid, but this blip did leave me a little bit concerned. I've only been using it for 7 days, and it was one day where I was out and about where I did have a little bit of a problem with it. I haven't had any problems with any recent Pixel device in the same places, but I'll be sure to test this a little bit longer, or the longer that I use the phone, to work out if it was just a momentary blip, or as I say, a unique issue. For what it's worth, nobody else on the team here at 9to5 Google has had any modem or connection issues at any stage thus far, but I am keeping an eye on this and hoping it was just user error. I've been known to make those before, or a VPN issue, which again, that could be the case. It could have been those two fighting while on a weaker network signal, but I wanted to note it in this video as some people will be asking, how does a new modem perform? In 99.9% of cases, this 0.1% edge case I've had, it's been absolutely fine. It seems pretty fast. I can get 1 gigabit down in my home area with 5G, which is very impressive. So let's get into the only major change that you'll find on the Pixel 11, and that is in the camera hardware stack. We finally have an upgrade to a better main sensor, which means, at least in my experience, marginally better photos. I haven't yet come to a definitive conclusion, but I do think the camera is improved over the previous generation, which is great to see. I do find that the camera functions do make bigger leaps this time around rather than the hardware stack. As I say, we have a main sensor that's changed, not much else. Take, for example, those camera looks. To me, this has been absolutely long overdue, but it's still an important step forward for customization for the camera experience. I really like playing around with these camera looks, but I found the controls a little bit finicky. As part of those quick access controls, or at least those options within the viewfinder, you can double tap to bring up the 4 tools on the 4 corners of the screen. Then you can scroll to access your on-device looks. I personally would have liked an adjustment to how this activates, maybe a quicker way to access this function, as it does seem like a key component. To get deeper into the controls and adjustments, you have to tap the settings icon in the bottom right, then looks, then choose the setting itself and make adjustments one by one in each of the settings. I think maybe something a little bit less cumbersome would have been my own preferred option, just to drop down with the shutter within the shutter area or just above the shutter button, or a slider carousel right there below the zoom controls. I think that would be right at your fingertips, would make this a lot easier to use, and a lot of people would like that. Yeah, I can already see this being a really powerful and important tool for people who want customization, especially as I do think the Pixel camera experience has kind of hit its peak, and we're adding these AI features that do make a big difference. I can already see Magic Capture as well is going to be amazing for families, and in particular, when handing your phone over to someone you might not be confident will get the photo that you want of an important moment, like your kids, for instance, maybe a sports event, that kind of thing. All you need to do is just point the camera at the subject, let the phone do the rest. It kind of feels counterintuitive to anyone like myself who likes to take their photography a little bit more seriously, but for the less confident, this Top Shot upgrade does a really fantastic job. I'd liken it to when I'm shooting high frame rate videos and just pull stills as photos. This is just letting the AI make that selection for itself, which it does work well in my limited testing. I can get some great pictures of my dog running around the garden, kicking a football around, and I've been really pleased with the results. I think if you have small children, and as I say, if you hand it over to an elderly relative, this could be a really fantastic option. Just get them to point and shoot, let the camera take care of the rest. And I do think Gemini has a pretty good eye for what makes a good photo, or at least an action shot, when they've recorded that short video. I've also been impressed in recent years with how the base Pixel has handled even my busiest days. The Pixel 11 is absolutely the same once again. In my week using this as my main device, I'm getting impressively long, or at least impressive longevity, despite not itself being a quantum leap. My screen time is never really, or at least my own screen time I don't think is a very solid metric, but I would say expect 5 to 6 hours as a minimum if you do have mixed usage. Think Android Auto with some GPS, texting, maybe a brief video call or a call here and there, lots of browsing, light gaming. It's all pretty rudimentary today. I feel like the background processes aren't necessarily sapping this phone like maybe it did on older versions, or the older versions of Pixel phones have suffered from previously. It's been pretty darn good from what I've experienced so far. With charging as well, I've tried the extreme charging mode, but it still feels pretty slow and outdated compared to the competition, even when that's activated. I kind of hoped we'd get 25-watt charging with Pixel Snap this time as well, but alas, no changes to that 15-watt speed introduced last year. Yeah, pretty darn slow in terms of a battery on a phone such as this when it comes to charge speed. So yeah, that's a bit of a disappointment as well. So as I say, I don't quite think a week is enough to give you a substantial verdict on the Pixel 11, so I'll give you some thoughts, some feelings that I've had with this phone. There is still so much more for me to test with this phone, but I already think it's really tough to recommend this to anyone with a working phone made in the last 2 to 3 years, especially if you're content with that device that you're currently rocking. I do think there is a growing over-reliance on the AI functionality for Pixel phones, functionality that really isn't moving the needle unless you want something specific or you drill down into the specifics themselves. Google's kind of always been a software company, and after nailing the fundamentals with the Pixel 9 a couple of years ago, I think they've kind of leaned more heavily into software tuning rather than trying to make a major hardware gain with the Pixel lineup. Yes, the Pixel 11 on the surface is a good phone, but a very expensive phone, and one that I think is tough to evaluate without all of the other market factors being thrown into the measure or into the actual conversation there. In a few months, as with any Pixel, it'll become a much better buy by virtue of those discounts and sales that tend to happen, and that's always been the case with Google hardware, for better or worse. At launch, they're a tough sell. A few months later down the line, they become a bit easier to recommend. As I say, we will revisit the Pixel 11 a few weeks from now, once we have a better opportunity to fully test drive every single component, and again in a few months to see how updates have altered some of the aspects of the device for better or worse, and you can get full reviews of those later down the line, so stick around for those. Hopefully this has given you an insight to what it's been like to use this phone for a week. I know it's not necessarily as in-depth as you maybe would have liked it to be, but a week is a really tough time to test every single component, especially when you have a slate of devices to test at the same time. But hopefully this has answered at least some of your questions. Cheers for watching though, and as always, I'll speak to you later.